When my grandmother was 11 years old, she came home one morning and saw her mother crying, sitting at the kitchen table. You never forget something like that. My great-grandmother was a tough woman, one of those women who never cried in public, who never complained in front of her children, who endured everything standing on her own 2 feet. But that morning, she was crying, silently, with her head in her hands, while the little ones were still asleep. And my grandmother told me many times, when she was already older, with her own grandchildren on her lap, that this was the day she understood that something had ended, that from then on, things were going to be different, that she had to learn, all at once, how to grow up. In those years, the same thing happened in many homes. Hard times arrived, times when food was measured by the gram, when ration cards were more important than money, when some neighbors went to bed hungry and others, the oldest and the youngest, did not wake up in the morning. And my grandmother, that 11-year-old girl, had to learn very quickly how to help her mother raise 3 younger siblings, with no money, with no stored supplies, and with no shops where they could buy what was missing, because the shops were almost empty. She learned to do it with 5 plants. Only 5. And today I'm going to tell you how and why. With those 5 plants, my grandmother and her family ate better than you are probably eating today. My name is Hank, and most of my videos are made to teach you about plants, to teach you remedies, to help you understand what pharmacies are overcharging you for. But this video is different. This video is a story. The story of how my grandmother, who at that time was only a frightened little girl with 2 braids and a hand-me-down apron, survived, helped her family get through it, and learned lessons that she later passed on to me. And today, I'm going to pass them on to you. And at the end of the video, I'm going to give you the exact recipe for the dish she prepared with those 5 plants. The dish that kept her alive for years. The dish that even today appears in my kitchen when I want to remember who I was before I had everything I have. The times I'm talking about were times of scarcity. There have been many such times throughout history, in many countries, after wars, after crises, after bad harvests. Times when ordinary people had to learn how to eat with what was available. And what was available was almost always very little. There were times like that in Europe after the Great Wars. There were times like that in many countries in Latin America. There were times like that in Asia, in Africa, in places you have never even heard of. Probably, if you think back slowly, there was a grandmother, or a great-grandmother, or an older aunt in your own family who lived through something similar. And you grew up with her stories without fully understanding what she was telling you. You think they exaggerated. They did not exaggerate. If anything, they held back, because the truly hard things are not told to grandchildren. Today, we are going to understand them. The 5 plants. The 5 lessons. Subscribe to Hank's Greenery and hit the bell. Here, we are rescuing what they knew and what we are forgetting. My grandmother had the kind of name so many other grandmothers had. She was small, strong, with large hands and short fingers. She had that look women have when they have seen things they would rather not talk about. And she had one rule that she never broke in her entire life, not even 40 years later, when it was no longer necessary. The rule was this: at her table, nothing gets thrown away. Nothing. A wilted lettuce leaf was soup. A piece of hard bread was dessert with a little water and sugar. A bone was a 3-day broth. And while everyone else saw trash, my grandmother saw dinner. She learned that rule in those years. And she never let it go. 40 years later, with the fridge full and money in the bank, my grandmother still made use of everything that passed through her kitchen, not out of stinginess, out of respect, so as not to forget, because when you have truly gone hungry, even once, you never look at food the same way again. And to survive those years, she and her mother clung to 5 plants. 5. They did not choose the prettiest ones, or the rarest ones, or the most expensive ones in the market, because there was hardly any market at all. They chose the ones that grew on their own, the ones that gave something even if you barely cared for them, the ones that filled a plate when there was nothing else, the ones earlier generations had already used in other hard times and had passed down to the next generation, quietly, in the kitchen, while the girls learned without realizing they were learning. The first plant my grandmother relied on was the potato. The potato does not fail. She said that phrase to me 1,000 times. The potato does not fail. And if the potato fails you, child, then something very serious is happening. My grandmother's mother taught the girls to plant pieces of old potato with a sprout, those pieces that anyone today would throw straight into the trash. She would take a potato that had already started growing little shoots in the pantry sack, cut it into pieces, making sure each piece had at least one sprout, and bury them in any corner of soil. In the yard, in wooden boxes filled with soil on the balcony, in the pot where there used to be a geranium, anywhere. And 3 months later, food came out of the earth, without paying for seed, without buying anything. And that, for an 11-year-old girl with 3 hungry siblings, was almost a small miracle. My grandmother told me that the first time she saw potatoes come out of the soil she herself had planted, she cried, from joy, from pride, from not really knowing why. She cried because she understood that the earth, if she treated it well, was not going to abandon her. And why was the potato so nourishing? Because a single medium potato provides slow-absorbing carbohydrates, a surprising amount of vitamin C, more than many fruits, potassium, and fiber when eaten with the skin. And boiled potato is one of the most filling foods that exists. There are published studies on satiety that place it in first position, above many modern foods that weigh 3 times as much. That is why it filled empty stomachs like very few things can. One boiled potato, nothing more, could sustain a child for an entire morning. And look at what has happened over the years. Today, the potato is what we eat as a bag of potato chips, drowned in salt and refined oil, full of artificial flavorings. Today, the potato is what comes frozen in a rectangular bag to be put in the oven or the air fryer. When a single boiled potato with its skin, nothing more, nothing added, was what sustained entire families in those years. And it nourished them more, much more. There is the difference, raw and plain, without makeup. The second plant was legumes, lentils, chickpeas, beans, the protein of the poor. When there were some, there were some. When there were none, there were none. My grandmother's mother kept a small sack of lentils and another of chickpeas at the very top of the kitchen cabinet, hidden behind the Sunday dishes, almost like treasure. They were the only protein in the house for weeks at a time, and she rationed them the way she would ration gold, measuring them by handfuls, calculating how many handfuls were left until the end of the month. And here is an image my grandmother used to describe with shining eyes every time she told it. The night before making lentils, her mother would soak them in a large clay bowl on the kitchen table under the dim light of an oil lamp, and the 4 siblings, before going to sleep, would pass by and look at that bowl. They did not touch it. They only looked the way you look at something important. Because the next day, that bowl was dinner. And dinner, in those years, was the only sure thing in the day. When there were lentils in my house, it was a celebration. That is what my grandmother told me. When there were lentils, it was a celebration. And when there were none, My mother would take the empty soaking bowl from the day before, that bowl where there was barely a cloudy residue of water left, and make us broth with that. And it still tasted like lentils. It still fooled us enough to make us feel full. Why were legumes so nourishing? Because they are one of the few plant sources with protein close to complete. They provide iron, folic acid, fiber, magnesium. And if you eat them with a grain, bread, rice, whatever, the amino acids complement each other and form protein of a quality equivalent to meat. Grandmothers knew this without ever having studied it in any book. They knew that lentils with rice or chickpeas with bread filled you better than either one alone. They knew it by instinct, through generations of observation, through trying and comparing. And modern nutritionists, the serious ones, the ones who truly research, have spent the last 10 years telling us that the diets of the so-called blue zones, the places on the planet where people live the longest with the best health, include legumes 3 or 4 times a week. The same thing. Exactly the same thing. The same thing our grandmothers ate when there was nothing else. The third plant is the one I like telling you about the most, because it was a discovery, and because it proves that in hard times, open ears can save your life. Nettle. My grandmother had an elderly neighbor, a woman who lived alone in the house next door, a woman almost nobody paid attention to because she talked to herself and smelled strange. But that woman, in the middle of those years, taught my grandmother something that changed the way her family ate. She taught her how to gather nettles in the countryside, those nettles nobody even wanted to touch because they sting. The ones gardeners today pay money to have removed. She taught her to pick the tender leaves with gloves, to put them in boiling water for 1 minute, because when you blanch them, they lose their sting completely. It disappears. They no longer sting at all, and to make soup, omelets, croquettes, with a little breadcrumb, anything. And here comes an image my grandmother used to describe with the pride of a child. The first time she came home with a basket full of nettles she had gathered by herself on the road by the river, feeling grown up, feeling useful, feeling like someone who was bringing food home. When her mother saw her come in with that basket, she sat down. She cried again, but this time for a different reason. She kissed her on the forehead, and she said, "Child, you have learned the most important thing." And my grandmother didn't understand at that moment what the most important thing was. It took her years to understand it. Her neighbor always told her the same thing. "Nettle, child, stings on the outside, but inside it feeds you." Valuable things are almost always like that. That phrase stayed with my grandmother her entire life. And why was it so nourishing? Because nettle is a wild, nutritional powerhouse. It has more iron than spinach, more vitamin C than many fruits, calcium, folic acid, magnesium, and all of that for nothing, because it grows on its own in any vacant lot, on any riverbank, on any abandoned wall, in almost every temperate climate on the planet. The grandmothers of those years did not know it in those scientific terms, but they knew it in other ways. They knew that after a season eating nettles, the children looked better, had more strength, and had rosier cheeks. And here comes the lesson of nettle, which to me is one of the most beautiful in this whole story. What nourishes the most is often what nobody wants to pick, what they call weeds, what modern gardeners pull out and get paid to remove, what is free, what is wild, what you step on every day without seeing it. If at this point in the video you feel moved, give it a thumbs up. Not for me, for her. For all the women who lived through what she lived through and whom nobody ever remembered, and Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so yet. Here, we keep telling these stories, the ones that deserve not to be lost. The fourth and fifth plants go almost hand in hand because both did the same thing. They gave flavor, and flavor in those years was what separated survival from dignity. Onion and garlic. My grandmother explained this to me with a clarity I will never forget. She said, "Little Hank," because she always called me Little Hank until the very last day. Little Hank, my mother could make a soup with water, one small potato, 2 nettle leaves, and a scant handful of lentils. And that by itself tasted like almost nothing. It tasted like too little. It tasted like disguised hunger. But if my mother added to that same water a chopped onion and 2 garlic cloves crushed with a little salt, that same soup became something else. It tasted like home. It tasted like something worth sitting down to eat. My mother used to say, "With 1 garlic clove and 1 onion, even water tastes like food." And she was right. My mother was right about many things, but especially about that. My grandmother repeated that phrase dozens of times. With 1 garlic clove and 1 onion, even water tastes like food. Tattoo it in your memory, because it sums up better than any nutrition book what it means to eat like a human being. Why were onion and garlic so important beyond flavor? Because of immunity. We have already talked in other videos about garlic and onion. Allicin in garlic, quercetin in onion, sulfur compounds in both. In times of scarcity, when there was no access to medicine or to good overall nutrition, when winter brought flus and colds that turned into pneumonia, these 2 plants were what kept people from falling into serious infections all winter. And if they did fall ill, they helped them recover sooner. It is no exaggeration to say that onion and garlic in those homes saved lives. Real lives of real people. People who, without those 2 cheap bulbs in the kitchen, probably wouldn't have made it through the winter. And here is the lesson. Flavor is not a luxury. Flavor is not optional, not decorative, not something you add afterward if there is time. Flavor is what makes you eat what you need to eat. A meal without flavor does not truly satisfy. It fills the stomach, yes, for a while, but it does not fill the soul. And my grandmother and her mother, with 2 things as cheap as an onion and a few cloves of garlic, gave soul to every plate, and they kept an entire family feeling like a family, sitting around a table that smelled like real food in the middle of years when many families were breaking inside because not even the table united them anymore. And here is the 5th. The last one, the one many people do not consider a plant because it comes in a bottle. But it is. Oil, good fat. And here, I need you to understand something important before continuing. The 5th plant is not just one plant. It changes depending on where you live, depending on where your grandmother lived. In my family's case, it was olive oil. In your grandmother's family, it may have been lard, homemade butter, sunflower oil, coconut oil, palm oil. Whatever the land in your corner of the world provided, the specific plant changes, but the principle is exactly the same everywhere. You need a good fat for your body to make use of food. In my grandmother's house, her mother kept half a bottle of olive oil hidden behind the highest kitchen cabinet, behind the good plates, those plates nobody used anymore, because there was no one left to invite for a meal, and she rationed it as if it were medicine. 1 spoonful for the whole soup, half a drizzle over boiled potatoes, barely a drop to rub the pan so the nettle omelet would not stick. She called it, and this is word for word, this is how my grandmother told it to me 100 times, she called it liquid gold. liquid gold. And nobody in that house touched that bottle without permission, because touching the liquid gold without permission was a very serious offense. Why was fat so important, besides making food taste better? Because healthy fats are essential. Essential. The body needs fat to absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K, the so-called fat-soluble vitamins. Without fat in the diet, many vegetables and many minerals are not properly used, not absorbed. They do not enter your body, no matter how much you eat them. The grandmothers of those years did not know the names of those vitamins. They had never heard of fat-soluble absorption in their lives. But they knew that a dish without its little bit of fat was a dish that did not fill you, did not nourish you, did not sustain you. And they were right. Modern nutritional science fully confirms it without qualification. And while today many people are afraid of fat, while they buy skim milk and low-fat cheese and remove oil from their salad, my grandmother and her mother, with 3 spoonfuls of olive oil a day, when they had it, and nothing more, kept going. Were they happy with so little? No, they were not. They were hungry, truly hungry. But they were healthier, I swear on everything I love, than half the people I know today, with fridges filled to the top, with things whose labels they cannot even read. And now comes the question that gives this video its title, the question that, when I told it to you at the beginning, maybe did not quite make sense. How is it possible that my grandmother, eating only 5 plants in times of scarcity, ate better than many people today with a full fridge? I'm going to answer you directly. No detours, no philosophy, no pretty phrases. Because my grandmother, without knowing it, ate 7 things we have completely lost. She ate real food. No labels with 20 ingredients, no barcodes, no English names that even chemists barely understand. She ate dense food, not abundant food. Every bite had real nutrients, not filler, not air, not disguised sugar. She ate seasonally, what the earth gave when it gave it. No strawberries in January or mangoes in December brought from the other side of the planet. When there was food, there was food. When there was not, there was not. She ate real fiber, pounds of fiber every month, from legumes, wild greens, potatoes with the skin, whole grain bread. While today most people barely reach the minimum recommended by doctors, she ate without added sugars, which is exactly what is making people sick today. Diabetes, fatty liver, childhood obesity. All of that, in large part, comes from sugar my grandmother never had in her pantry because there was not even enough money to imagine it. She ate fermented food. Legumes were soaked for long hours, which improves their digestibility. Bread was made with sourdough. Some vegetables were preserved in salt or vinegar. The body became accustomed to beneficial microorganisms that today we have completely removed from our diet. And she ate slowly as a family, sitting at a table, without screens, without rushing, without eating, while getting up to do something else. That also nourishes, even if we do not measure it on any label. The way we eat matters almost as much as what we eat. And we have completely forgotten that. 7 things my grandmother had for free without knowing it in the middle of hunger. And today we have to fight hard to recover them even with our fridges bursting. My grandmother lived to be 89 years old. She died in her bed, peacefully, lucid, until the very last day. And in the final years of her life, when I was already a grown man and took care of her on weekends, she always said the same phrase to me. She said it when she saw me open the fridge and take out things wrapped in plastic. She said it when she saw me in a hurry, eating, standing up in the kitchen, looking at my phone, chewing without tasting. She would say, "Little Hank, don't forget to eat like people. Eat like people. That was her phrase. And for years, I did not fully understand it. I heard it. I said, "Yes, Grandma," and I smiled at her. But I did not understand it. Until one day, after she had already been buried, already living alone in my house, I sat down at the table one afternoon with a plate of lentils made the way she made them, with her onion well sautéed, with her 2 garlic cloves, with her small piece of potato cut into little chunks, with 2 tender leaves of something green on top, with her final drizzle of raw oil. And there, alone in my kitchen, with that plate in front of me, I understood what she had been telling me for years. Eating like people means stopping. Stopping before you start to eat. It means giving food the respect it deserves, because something or someone gave its life or its labor so that food could reach your table. It means knowing what you are eating, where it comes from, how it was cooked, who touched it. It means sitting down, chewing, looking at the person in front of you, if you are lucky enough to have someone on the other side of the table. It means not turning food into fuel that you swallow while doing 3 other things at the same time. My grandmother, with 5 plants, ate like a human being her whole life. I, with a fridge full of food she would not even have recognized, took 40 years to begin doing the same, and it is still hard for me. Some days I manage it, other days I do not. But when I do manage it, I feel her sitting across from me at the table, and she smiles. And that is enough for me. And before I say goodbye, I'll leave you the recipe. The one I promised at the beginning of the video. Grandma's soup, the one that brings the 5 plants together in a single dish, and that she made when there was very little and she needed to feed many. The one that still appears in my kitchen when I want to remind myself who I am. Write it down, because this is worth copying onto a piece of paper and sticking in the kitchen. In a pot with a good drizzle of oil, whatever oil you have, whatever is used in your region, sauté 1 finely chopped onion and 2 or 3 garlic cloves crushed with the flat side of a knife. Let it cook over medium heat until the onion begins to turn golden and the kitchen smells the way it is supposed to smell. When that smell arrives, you know you are on the right path. Then add 1 medium potato cut into small cubes. Stir it around for a couple of minutes so it absorbs the flavor of the sauté. Add water, almost 1 liter. Add a generous handful of lentils, soaked since the night before, and drained. A pinch of salt. And let it simmer for 35 or 40 minutes until the lentils are tender and the potato breaks apart on the spoon. In the last 5 minutes of cooking, add a good handful of previously blanched nettle leaves, the ones you put in boiling water, for 1 minute so they lose their sting. If you cannot find nettles in your area, that is okay. Fresh spinach works, chard works, watercress works. Any leafy green vegetable you have on hand that is in season works. Turn off the heat, cover the pot, and let it rest for 2 minutes before serving. When you serve it in the bowl, add another little drizzle of raw oil on top without overdoing it, but without being stingy. That is all. 5 main ingredients. My grandmother's food. And I assure you, with all my heart, that when you try it in silence, seated, without rushing, you will understand many things I have never been able to explain to you with words. And now, tell me, did your grandmother, your great-grandmother, or any older woman in your family live through times like these? What was the plant or ingredient she used to help her family get through it? Tell me down below in the comments. I read them all. And this video, in particular, I am going to read slowly, because every comment here is a story that deserves not to be lost. Every name you write is the name of someone who sustained an entire family with almost nothing, and no one ever thanked her. Share this video with someone who has a grandmother. And if your grandmother is no longer here, dedicate 2 minutes to her tonight before going to sleep. Remember a smell, a phrase, a dish of hers. The women who lived through what she lived through deserve to be remembered by us who no longer have them in front of us, but who are alive because of what they endured. Subscribe to Hank's Greenery. Hit the bell. Here, we keep rescuing what previous generations knew and what we are forgetting. I'm Hank, and I'll see you in the next garden.